It all began on a humid summer evening in the heart of the city, where a nervous energy pulsed through the streets like a heartbeat. I had always thought that life could be segmented into clear shades, moments of professional triumph, corridors of personal woes, and occasional moments of unexpected delight. That night, I had been invited out by my boss, an invitation that was as much an easing gesture as it was a challenge. I remember looking into the mirror, adjusting my tie and rehearsing the conversation in my head. I was nervous yet thrilled, unaware that my decision to accompany him instead of my friend, the one who had long been embroiled in a legal affair, would set events in motion that none of us could have anticipated. The courtroom drama that had unfolded over the last few months had gripped the local media. Accusations, alibis, and evidence were swirling in a tangled dance that often left the public doubting not just the accused, but the justice system itself. The case centered around an embezzlement scheme that had drained millions from a well-respected community foundation, and the defendant, a stoic mid-level executive who had maintained his innocence from the start, had become a person of intrigue. His stoicism was reflected in his measured speeches, his furtive glances, and even in the way his hands trembled ever so slightly when presenting documents. Little did anyone know, however, that the twist of fate was soon to outshine the narrative scripted by all the legal experts. Inside the cavernous courtroom, the judge held court with a resolute sense of authority, his gavel acting as both a symbol and an instrument of finality. His reputation for swift decisions was well established, and many believed that his courtroom was a place where hard evidence mattered above all else. Over the course of the trial, numerous pieces of material evidence had been presented, bank statements, computer records, and financial reports that at first glance seemed irrefutable. Yet, the judge's eyes, though determined, harbored a peculiar fatigue, as though each case was a reminder of justice that was more desire than fact. For all the technical arguments laid out before him, he had yet to fully grasp the nuances of human error, or the unspoken truths that sometimes lay beneath the surface. The proceedings maintained a semblance of order at first, with the prosecution laying out a measured narrative of corruption and betrayal. Their case was bolstered by a series of seemingly incontrovertible facts, but a gnawing inconsistency became apparent to those paying close attention: an anomaly in the dates, discrepancies in the formatting of the bank records, and minor typing irregularities that were quickly dismissed as clerical errors. As the trial advanced, the defense, led by a sharp-witted attorney known for his unconventional tactics, sought to introduce a different perspective. He argued that the evidence was not only incomplete but carefully manipulated at key moments to fool the untrained eye. His voice would grow stronger as time went by, challenging the very foundations of the narrative that the courtroom had erected over the course of the trial. One by one, the witnesses took the stand until all seemed nearly sealed. Among them was a forensic accountant, a meticulous professional who had painstakingly compiled the financial records and traced the transactions back to their origin. His testimony, though laden with detail, was overlooked by the judge, who appeared more intent on the overall picture than the minute particulars. The defense, having exhausted what they perceived as an opportunity to create reasonable doubt, was on the brink of conceding defeat. Yet, beneath the tension in the courtroom, there was a sense that the final decisive twist was yet to come. Outside the courtroom, I had found solace in a different reality, a nocturnal world of dimly lit lounges, whispered confidences, and corporate sarcasm. My boss, a man of enigmatic charm and easy laughter, had taken me out that night to celebrate yet another minor victory at work. Still reeling from the emotional surge of the trial and literal escapism from the plight of my friend, the defendant, I allowed myself to be consumed by the evening. However, the celebrations were tinged with an underlying melancholy. I carried with me a secret hope that the trial would unveil the truth, that justice would, in the end, be more than a mere facade. And so I dove into the carefree chatter, the clinking of glasses, and the underlying tension that every so often reminded me of what had been left unresolved in that sterile courtroom. As fate would have it, during an intermission on the third day of the trial, an email arrived at the defense attorney's office that would alter the course of the proceedings entirely. The correspondence was curt and anonymous, but it contained a reference to a person who could discredit the inconsistency in the case and, more importantly, provide insights that no document ever could. At first, the defense attorneys were skeptical, secret tips often turned out to be mere nuisances. However, there was something unmistakably earnest about the email, a sincerity that drew their attention. It spoke of a surprise witness, someone with first-hand knowledge of a critical detail overlooked by the prosecution, a detail that could bridge the gap between the manipulated evidence and the actual truth behind the transactions. The tension in the courtroom reached a new pitch on the fourth day. As the defense attorney stood facing the judge, he made a fervent request to introduce the surprise witness. The judge, having grown weary of the back-and-forth technicalities detailed over countless hours, hesitated. His initial reaction was skepticism. This was something completely out of the ordinary, and he was not inclined to allow last-minute theatrics that could derail the proceedings further. Yet, in a moment of quiet reflection, as he stared across the room at the defendant, a man who had endured the weight of injustice with a steady demeanor, the judge decided to grant the request. After all, it was his duty to ensure that every possible angle was explored, every facet of the evidence questioned. The courtroom fell into a hushed silence as the witness, a soft-spoken woman with a subtle air of nervous determination, was escorted to the stand. Her eyes flickered with both trepidation and the fierce need to reveal what she knew. The surprise witness did not come with an elaborate introduction, rather she simply began to recount a series of events that spanned several months, a timeline that directly implicated the tampering of records and the manipulation of evidence. With delicate precision, she described meetings that had taken place behind closed doors, where decisions regarding financial transactions were made off the official record, details that no forensic accountant would have ever unearthed. Her testimony was a tapestry of fragmented memories, overheard conversations, and subtle hints that combined to form a picture both damning and extraordinary. The defense attorney listened intently, his expression progressively transforming from skepticism to astonished resolve. He marshaled her words like evidence in their own right, pointing out every inconsistency that had plagued the prosecution's case. Meanwhile, the judge, who had so far seen the trial as a series of methodical, unyielding statements of fact, began to reevaluate his earlier dismissal of the evidence presented. His eyes, once clouded by an over-reliance on documentation, now shone with a spark of curiosity. There was a palpable shift in the courtroom. What began as an atmosphere of resignation had given way to one of genuine gravitas. As the witness recounted her experiences, she revealed her connection to a clandestine meeting involving several high-ranking officials. The accounts she described were not merely hearsay, they were details that could be corroborated by other discreet contacts, details that painted a different narrative of greed, manipulation, and the dire consequences of unchecked ambition. It was at that moment that the defense attorney made a daring move, a revelation that tied the mystery back to the defendant's own path in life, and indeed to my own inadvertent involvement that fateful night. The witness hinted at an incident that involved the defendant's dinner with influential players on that ill-fated night when I had chosen the wrong company, a night whose memories had been suppressed but never entirely forgotten. In a stunning twist, she confirmed that the defendant had not been merely a passive victim of circumstance. He had been manipulated into acquiescence by powerful forces who sought to keep their secrets buried. The unexpected link between that night out with my boss and the ongoing trial was exposed, muddying the water further. I recall sitting in the bar hours after the witness's testimony, reeling from the realization that the consequences of one night's decision could cascade into events that touched the lives of so many. The revelation was like a stone dropped into a still pond, the ripples reaching far beyond the immediate vicinity. I could see the evidence of guilt and repentance etched on the face of my once trusted friend, the defendant, whose eyes conveyed a mix of relief and melancholy as he finally saw a chance for his truth to emerge from the shadows. The defense attorney's strategy now shifted entirely. Armed with corroborating evidence provided by the surprise witness, he set out to dismantle the prosecution's narrative piece by piece. Every statement previously given in testimony was re-examined under the harsh light of these new revelations. The judge, finally confronted with the reality that his earlier dismissal might have been premature or even misguided, began to weigh the credibility of all evidence with a renewed determination. In the midst of this reevaluation, I found myself reflecting on the very human element of justice, how easily truth could be obscured by assumption, and how the intersection of life's chaotic unpredictability could give rise to moments that alter the course of history. Night after night, as I recalled the events that had led me here, I realized that my life and the events of the trial were more intertwined than they had ever appeared on the surface. The night I had spent out with my boss, a night meant to provide an escape from the pressures of everyday life, had inadvertently become a catalyst in re-examining hidden truths. My boss, whose decision to leave me after taking the night to heart had initially been a source of personal anguish, now seemed to him a victim of circumstances as complex and convoluted as the case itself. The subtle interplay of professional rivalry, personal neglect, and inadvertent involvement wove a narrative that was as unpredictable as it was impactful. I began to wonder if the very same forces that had influenced the unfolding legal drama were at play in the lives of those around me, shaping destinies in ways that defied logic and expectation. In the course of days that seemed to stretch out indefinitely, the courtroom became a theater of human drama and divine irony. The judge, whose earlier rigidity had drawn criticism from both sides of the legal spectrum, now took on the role of an investigator, revisiting discarded evidence, re-examining depositions, and questioning long-held assumptions. His recasting of the trial was a testament to the idea that for justice to truly prevail, it must be adaptive and responsive to the nuances that life presented. The atmosphere grew tense, charged with an almost frenetic energy that made every minute feel like a lifetime. Whispers of skepticism turned to murmurs of hope as new truths started to surface, all thanks to the persistent efforts of a single brave witness who had risked everything to see the light of truth. As the trial entered its final phase, excitement mingled with apprehension. The defense attorney, galvanizing all the momentum built by the surprise witness's testimony, began a comprehensive cross-examination of the prosecution's key witnesses. Every minor discrepancy, every overlooked detail was laid bare for the judge and the jury to witness. With a surgeon's precision, he dismantled the prosecution's evidence, leaving them scrambling to salvage the remnants of a case that was gradually unraveling. The judge's demeanor shifted from one of detached authority to active engagement, his decisions reflecting a deep-seated desire to ensure that every voice in the room was heard and every shred of evidence was considered. In one particularly dramatic moment, the defense attorney presented a dossier containing newly uncovered internal emails that further substantiated the witness's claims. The emails, though short and seemingly innocuous at first glance, revealed clandestine meetings between high-level executives and hinted at a deliberate cover-up. The courtroom fell silent as the evidence was meticulously laid out, the once impregnable facade of the prosecution's case cracking under the weight of undeniable proof. I remember feeling a surge of vindication, not simply for the defendant's struggle, but for the countless lives that had been affected by the unattributed decisions and secretive machinations behind the scenes. Even as the defense built its case, I found myself in a labyrinth of personal reflection. The past months had not only reshaped the legal landscape but had also altered the way I saw the world, an amalgam of chaos, hope, struggle, and redemption. I recalled that night out with my boss as a turning point, a moment when I was forced to confront the duality of trust and betrayal in personal relationships. His decision to walk away from me had created a void, yet it also catalyzed a journey of self-understanding and growth. It was as if the universe was orchestrating a strange form of poetic justice, where every seemingly unrelated event was intricately linked by fate's unpredictable thread. In that vein, the courtroom was not just a battleground for legal arguments, but a microcosm of life, where every individual's truth was waiting to be revealed, often in the most unexpected ways. With the tide turning in favor of the defense, the atmosphere in the courtroom was palpably charged with an air of finality and anticipation. The judge, now fully aware that his earlier neglect of the evidence might have contributed to a miscarriage of justice, pledged to re-examine every shred of testimony with fresh eyes. In a stirring declaration, he announced that the trial would undergo a thorough review, acknowledging that the revelations brought by the surprise witness warranted not only further investigation but also a temporary halt to the proceedings. This decision sent shockwaves through the courtroom, with lawyers on both sides trading glances that were part relief, part hardened determination. For the defendant, it was a moment of exultation, a confirmation that even in the darkest hours of a legal straitjacket, a spark of truth could ignite the path toward redemption. As the days turned into weeks, the legal community and the media at large watched with bated breath as the review unfolded. Behind closed doors, investigators began to trace every lead mentioned by the surprise witness, re-interviewing old contacts and revisiting evidence that had been meticulously archived. The process was both painstaking and revelatory, unearthing details that painted a picture of corruption that extended far beyond the immediate case. Whispers of a vast network of illicit financial maneuvers spread like wildfire, a complex web in which influential players had manipulated the system to protect their own interests. The courtroom, once the arena for a single defendant's trial, had now transformed into the epicenter of a scandal that threatened to shake the foundations of the entire financial establishment. I could only imagine the internal turmoil of those involved, the judges, the lawyers, the executives, all caught in a complex dance of power and secrecy. At night, as I laid awake in my modest apartment, those thoughts circled my mind, tugging at my conscience. I wondered about the nature of trust and responsibility, about how even the smallest actions might have profound consequences. Every time my phone buzzed with a new update on the case, a pang of anxiety and anticipation coursed through me. It was then that I realized that life rarely presented clear-cut resolutions. Instead, it was a series of interlocking moments, each steeped in complexity, that demanded we see beyond the surface and embrace the messy intricacies of truth. One rainy afternoon, when the city's pulse seemed muted by the persistent drizzle, the review came to a head. A panel of expert witnesses was brought in to assess the newly uncovered evidence, and their verdict shook the foundation of the prosecution's case. Every claim made in the initial trial was now subject to intense scrutiny, and an atmosphere of suspense gripped the courtroom as the expert panel's findings were unveiled. In a voice laden with authority and tempered by the weight of justice, the panel confirmed that the original documents had indeed been tampered with, alterations that were so subtle as to defy immediate detection, yet gross enough to mislead even the most seasoned investigators. In that moment, the courtroom erupted into stunned silence, the gravity of the revelation simmering in every heart. For the defendant, who had long carried the burden of whispered judgments and furtive glares, the vindication was bittersweet, a necessary step toward truth that had come with its own cost. The judge himself was visibly affected by the panel's findings. He reviewed every detail of the tampered evidence, his previously confident stance gradually being replaced by a somber determination to correct the course of justice. In that instance, I could almost see the invisible lines of time rewriting the narrative, a narrative that had once seemed so sealed and immutable, now offering the promise of redemption and closure. The defense attorney, whose arguments had so often relied on challenging the veracity of the evidence, was now buoyed by the definitive statements of the panel. With unwavering conviction, he made a passionate plea that the trial be reopened, that the defendant's years of unjust suffering be rectified, and that the ultimate truth, regardless of how messy it might be allowed to emerge. The judge, acknowledging that the scales of justice had long been unbalanced, reserved his next pronouncement with a measured pause that invited every observer to hold their breath. It was during this tense interlude that I reflected on the delicate interplay between fate and free will. I recalled my own journey, my premature decisions, the unforeseen consequences they wrought, and the serendipity that had turned my life toward an unexpected path. In a strange twist of irony, the very events that had once appeared isolated were now inextricably linked to the broader sweep of justice and truth. I had inadvertently become a spectator to a drama that transcended the individual, a drama that spoke of systemic corruption, human resilience, and the relentless pursuit of what is right. The night out with my boss, a night that had initially been a source of personal disappointment, had, through a convoluted series of events, set in motion a chain reaction that was now pushing at the very boundaries of the legal system. The reopening of the trial was met with swirling headlines and fervent public debate. In newsrooms across the city, discussions ranged from outrage at the initial mishandling of evidence to hope for a more equitable future, one in which every human life would be valued enough to demand unyielding truth. I found solace in these discussions, even if they were sometimes abrasive, because they reminded me that justice was not a monolithic, unchangeable entity. It was a living, breathing organism, capable of adaptation, capable of learning from its past missteps. For the defendant, the reopening signified not only a chance to clear his name, but also a chance for society to reckon with its own vulnerabilities. In a rare moment of raw honesty, I contemplated that perhaps the most enduring legacy of this trial would not be the verdict itself, but rather the lessons it imparted to us all, that truth, in all its messy complexity, was worth fighting for. In the weeks that followed, the courtroom transformed into a place of intense collaboration between forensic experts, legal professionals, and the brave souls who had previously been silenced by the weight of corruption. The surprise witness was called upon once more, invited to lend further detail to a series of corroboratory testimonies that solidified her earlier revelations. As she spoke, her voice, a quiet but resolute cadence, reiterated the hidden meetings, the secret transactions, and the unyielding power of those who had manipulated the system. Her testimony was no longer a solitary account. It was now woven into a tapestry of evidence, meticulously documented and carefully verified. The momentum was undeniable, and even the most skeptical members of the jury began to nod in quiet acknowledgement of the emerging truth. Day by day, the layers of deceit were peeled away, revealing a network of clandestine activities that spanned months and even years. The prosecution, once so confident in the veracity of their evidence, was forced to confront the disconcerting reality that they had been operating on incomplete and, in some respects, falsified information. In one dramatic courtroom session, an expert in digital forensics took the stand and explained how sophisticated techniques had been employed to alter the financial records. With each explanation, the judge's furrowed brow deepened, and even the defense attorney allowed himself a rare smile, a smile of triumph tempered by the gravity of the situation. The evidence was now irrefutable, and the scales of justice began to tip in favor of the truth that had long been hidden in the shadows. It was in that charged atmosphere of revelation that the final twist of the narrative began to take shape, a twist that startled everyone, including those who thought they had seen it all. In the midst of the ongoing review, an additional witness emerged. This individual, a quiet and unassuming clerk from the Central Records Department, came forward with documents and a detailed account of internal memos that further linked the tampered evidence to a broader, orchestrated effort to defraud the community. The clerk's testimony was meticulous and entirely devoid of any malice. He explained that, years before the trial, there had been quiet discussions at the highest levels about safeguarding certain financial discrepancies, deviations that would later be manipulated to serve the interests of a powerful cabal. His revelation cast an even wider net of culpability, implicating not just a handful of rogue actors, but an entire network of influential entities. His evidence was a final, decisive blow that unified all the disparate threads of the case into a coherent narrative of deliberate corruption. The courtroom was transformed into a vortex of emotion and stunned realization. The judge, who had earlier been the epitome of austere detachment, now bore the marks of deep introspection. In a moment that seemed to draw the entire room into its gravity, he acknowledged that justice had been delayed but, perhaps, was not denied. With a voice quivering with both regret and resolve, he declared that the defendant would be granted a new trial, a trial that promised to be one of the most comprehensive and transparent in recent legal history. The announcement was met with a mixture of subdued applause and tentative hope. For the defendant, it was a ray of light piercing through the long darkness of suspicion and prejudice. In the ensuing days, as the new trial preparations took shape, the city itself seemed to hold its breath. News outlets speculated on the repercussions for the implicated officials, while community leaders pondered the lessons to be learned from a system nearly paralyzed by its own complacency. I found myself walking through the rain-dappled streets, thinking about the intricate interplay between individual actions and the vast machinery of institutional power. The case had evolved from a simple matter of alleged financial impropriety into a saga of human error, systemic failure, and the relentless demand for accountability. And all along I carried with me the quiet acknowledgement that my own life, once marked by the trivialities of personal disappointments like a boss's indifference or a friend's plight, had inadvertently become interwoven with a narrative that challenged the very essence of our societal structures. The months that followed were filled with tireless work by investigative teams and legal experts determined to ensure that the reopened trial would leave no stone unturned. Every new piece of evidence was treated as a vital thread in the fabric of truth, woven carefully into a narrative designed to restore faith in a justice system so long tarnished by hidden agendas. The surprise witness, whose courage had sparked the reopening, continued to testify with unwavering conviction, often recalling long-forgotten details that now shone with the clarity of truth. Her account was not just a litany of events but an intimate recollection of human frailty, moral compromise, and the unyielding desire to see justice done. Her words resonated with all present, a poignant reminder that the truth, however elusive, was always worth reckoning with. As for me, standing on the periphery of these momentous events, I could only marvel at life's uncanny ability to surprise and to mend. The night I had chosen to spend with my boss, a night that had initially filled me with both excitement and a latent sense of betrayal, had become a subtle turning point in a saga that promised redemption and accountability. I would often replay those memories, now filled with an odd mix of regret and gratitude. The boss had taken that evening to heart in ways I had never foreseen, and his decision to leave me had, in a roundabout fashion, freed me from the shackles of unwitting complicity. In the quiet hours before sleep, I acknowledged that every moment, both joyous and sorrowful, had contributed to a larger narrative of resilience, one that ultimately celebrated the triumph of truth over treachery. Finally, on a crisp autumn morning that hinted at the coming of winter, the day of the new trial arrived. The revamped courtroom, filled with renewed hope and a sense of solemn duty, bore witness to what many were calling a watershed moment in the fight for justice. The judge, now fully committed to redressing past errors, presided over the trial with a careful balance of rigor and empathy. The defense attorney, bolstered by the meticulous investigative work that had transpired over recent months, laid out a clear and detailed case that left little room for doubt. The prosecution, beleaguered by the mounting evidence of systematic tampering, found themselves struggling to maintain a semblance of their former narrative. As the trial progressed, the arguments grew more impassioned, the testimonies more forthright. Witness after witness recounted their experiences, each account contributing to a mosaic of indisputable evidence that affirmed the defendant's long-denied assertion of innocence. The surprise witness was called upon repeatedly, her clear, steady voice echoing with an urgency that belied the trauma of reliving those critical moments. The judge allowed her narrative to stand as a powerful testament to the idea that truth can emerge from even the most carefully concealed deceptions. With every passing day, every carefully scrutinized document, and every heartfelt testimony, the case inched closer to a resolution that promised not merely the exoneration of an individual, but the vindication of an entire community's faith in the judicial process. In the final hours of the trial, as the defense attorney presented his summation, a passionate, eloquent plea not just for the defendant's freedom but for the restoration of integrity in a system once marred by error, a hush fell over the courtroom. Every soul present, from the seasoned jurors to the weary legal professionals, seemed to understand the weight of the moment. Here, in this hallowed space, justice was being reborn. I, too, felt a profound connection to the unfolding events, recognizing that every human life, every decision, eventually contributed to the mosaic of truth. The night out, the betrayals, the revelations, all led inexorably to this final reckoning. With the final statement delivered, the courtroom erupted in a silence that was both reflective and anticipatory. The judge took a deep breath and, with a measured tone that carried the gravity of many lost years, pronounced his verdict. He acknowledged that the previously ignored evidence, now meticulously verified and incontrovertible, had altered the trajectory of the case. In a decision that sent a clear message that even the most deeply entrenched corruption could not deny the light of truth, he exonerated the defendant. The courtroom was flooded with a collective sense of relief and vindication, as years of doubt and despair were finally washed away by the clarion call of justice. As I stepped out of the courthouse that day, feeling the crisp autumn air on my face, I realized that life, with all its twists and turns, was far more intricate than a single night out with a boss, or a trial that once seemed doomed to error. It was a swirling interplay of chance, determination, and the unyielding pursuit of what was right. I thought about the tender smiles exchanged between strangers, the unspoken glances that said, "We believe in you," and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that even when the system faltered, truth had found its way out of the darkness. The surprise witness, the unexpected revelations, and even my own unexpected journey had converged to create a narrative that transcended the boundaries of individual pain and betrayal, emerging as a testament to the perennial power of redemption and accountability. And so, as the city prepared to write a new chapter in its storied history of justice, I walked away with a heart both heavy and light, a heart that had witnessed the flawed nature of man, yet still believed in his capacity to rise, to rectify, and to honor the sanctity of truth. The trial, the chaos, and even the personal fallout from fate's unpredictable orchestration had all come together to craft a story that would be remembered for generations. It was a story of a judge who, against all odds, chose to reevaluate his decisions, of a defendant who maintained his integrity through the darkest of times, and of a surprise witness whose courage illuminated secrets long hidden. In the end, what shone brightest was not the cold hard evidence, but the warm, unbreakable spirit of humanity, a spirit that, even in the face of betrayal, persevered in the name of justice. As the chapter closed and life began its inexorable march onward, the echoes of that trial would continue to remind us all that truth is not always found in the obvious, but sometimes in the subtle whisper of a single voice or the silent resolve of those who dare to challenge the status quo. And so, with hope in my step and lessons etched in my soul, I carried that night's memory forward, a memory of a moment when darkness was illuminated by the enduring glow of justice, when every ignored piece of evidence was finally given its due, and when the true strength of the human spirit was laid bare for all to see. In the end, the case was not just about one man's struggle or a single night's decision to spend time with a boss. It was about the broader tapestry of life, a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, betrayal, redemption, and hope. Each participant, from the judge who learned to question the unyielding status quo, to the defense attorney who fought tirelessly for the truth, to the brave surprise witness who risked everything by speaking out, contributed a vital chapter to a story that would forever change the community's faith in its institutions. And as I moved forward, ever mindful of the delicate interplay between destiny and free will, I promised myself that I would never again underestimate the power of a single choice, even one that, at first glance, might seem insignificant against the vast backdrop of life. For in that complex tapestry of events, every thread mattered. Every whispered secret, every neglected piece of evidence, and every unspoken regret had its place in the grand mosaic of redemption. And so, in a world where nothing is ever as it seems, and where the true essence of justice is found only after a relentless pursuit of truth, I learned that even the smallest act of courage, a solitary witness stepping forward, has the power to reshape destinies and, ultimately, to restore hope in the wake of despair. The memory of that trial, with all its twists, turns, betrayals, and eventual vindication, continues to serve as a beacon for those who believe in second chances, for those who trust in the delicate yet indomitable power of truth. And as the sun sets on another day in the city, a city that has seen its share of shadows and light, I remember that no matter how cleverly evidence is concealed or how meticulously narratives are constructed, there is always a path back to justice. It is a path paved with perseverance, faith, and the unwavering belief that every story has a turning point, every night is followed by dawn, and every heart, no matter how bruised, yearns to witness the blossoming of truth. Thus, the saga of that fateful trial stands not only as a cautionary tale of human frailty and systemic corruption, but also as a tribute to the resiliency of the human spirit. In a world where even the most powerful may falter, where evidence may be ignored until a voice rises in defiance, remember that true justice is not given. It is fought for, piece by piece, moment by moment, until the scales are balanced once more. And so, as I close this long, winding narrative, I hold close the lessons learned that fateful season in the courtroom, that every choice, every voice, and every act of courage reverberates with the promise of a better tomorrow, a tomorrow where judgment is tempered by empathy, where evidence is honored as the full story of truth, and where every life is given the chance to rise, unburdened by past wrongs, toward the steadfast light of justice.